Hey everybody, this is Tim. Welcome to the 250th episode of Tonebenders. That is really an insane number. I never dreamed this podcast would be able to get to 250 episodes. I'm really excited that we were able to get one of my all-time favorite guests to come on for episode 250, Dane Davis. Dane is getting the Lifetime Achievement Award at the MPSE Golden Reels coming up on March 3rd. I'm looking forward to meeting him in person that night, as I will be there to cheer him on. If anyone listening will be in the LA area and wants to come out to an amazing night to celebrate the past year of sound design, you can get tickets at MPSE.org. This will be my second Golden Reels. I had an absolute blast the first time. I'm also going to throw out a reminder that a couple of days ahead of the Golden Reels, on February 29th, will be our second Los Angeles Tonebenders sound design meetup. Last year was an absolute blast. So many people came out that it was a night I will always remember. If you were there last year, please come out again. It would be great to see you. And if you missed it, make sure you rectify that mistake and come out to the Thirsty Merchant in Studio City for 7 p.m. and hang out on the covered patio to share some stories and laughs with old friends and new from the LA sound community. Full details can be found at tonebenderspodcast.com. Okay, let's kick off our 250th episode. It's still weird to say that. We're going to be talking with Dane Davis. This is part one of this amazing talk. Make sure you tune back in next week to hear part two. Here we go. Hello and welcome to Tonebenders, where we talk with the sonic artists behind our favorite films, games, and series. My name is Tim Muirhead, and I will be your host today as we talk with an all-time great from the sound community, Dane Davis. Dane's previous appearance on Tonebenders is one of my all-time favorites. If you have not heard it, please do yourself a favor and search out episode 188. Dane is being honored with the Motion Picture Sound Editor's Lifetime Achievement Award at this year's Golden Reels ceremony. It's going to be a great night, so if you're in the Los Angeles area on March 3rd, make an effort to come out and be part of the celebration with Dane. Tickets can be found at mpse.org. So without further ado, let's get Dane Davis on and talk to him about what led to this amazing honor. Welcome to Tonebenders, Dane. It's great to have you back.
Thank you, Tim. It's great to be back.
Last time you were on, we spoke a lot about the Matrix quadrilogy, I guess you would call it now. Since we did that a lot then, I don't want to dwell on it too much today, but I kind of wanted to ask you one broad question about the Matrix project to get us started. Obviously, the Matrix was not your first project. You've been on the rodeo for a long time, had a very successful career by that point. But when you were cutting it, did you have an inkling of the kind of impact it was going to have?
Wow. Well, certainly had an inkling, an intuitive feeling that this was really special, but you never know. I have had that feeling prior to that and certainly since. No one really knows, And it was my 64th movie as a supervising sound editor. So I'd been doing a lot of stuff on, mostly movies people have never heard of. It's like one of my colleagues at the Oscar Bake Off at the Academy that we used to do. He sort of came up to me and he said, a lot of people here are going to see you as an, overnight sensation. But anybody that's been following me for the 20 years prior to that, I'd done a hell of a lot of shows. It was a special project and I have talked about it. And of course I could talk forever, about the Matrix projects, but, it was a script that was never going to get made. And when virtually all of us, the Wachowskis and Zach Steinberg and Bill Pope, the DP, and the whole gang, we had done Bound together and there was a script called The Matrix that couldn't possibly be made. And no one could make it for the money that anyone would put up for such a sort of intellectually challenging piece of, highbrow cinema. When it happened, all of a sudden, it was an amazing feeling because I remember when we were mixing Bound, we'd read the script and we were all talking about what if this movie actually got made? What would we do? But when it was happening, we all seemed very kind of blessed, kind of like aliens had brought us to Earth to do this kind of feeling from the beginning. It was whatever, I'm at a loss of adjectives, but magical, special, none of those words work. But I do remember a moment when we're about halfway done, and I was thinking, wow, this, even though I've done a whole lot of movies prior, this story, telling this story really requires and challenges my strengths and isn't daunting in view of any of my perceived weaknesses or things I didn't know enough about. It's like kind of everything was in that movie that I'd been thinking about for really my whole life, but certainly 20 years working professionally. So but then it happened. The show got a lot of attention and people connected to it and loved it in a way that I don't think anyone really predicted. It was a risky movie to make. So aesthetically, it was risky on a lot of levels as well for us to figure out, how to make this work. And because it's kind of an homage, especially to Ghost in the Shell, but also to Neuromancer and all the Hong Kong, in particular Hong Kong martial arts movies. And so there was a lot of things to consider as they were shooting it and doing the visual effects. And as I was trying to cook up the way things would sound to be kind of referential, but to take everything as far as I thought was possible. And of course, it went on and on. I spent a lot of years of my life in the, blue pill, red pill combo that we all lived in at that time.
Well, not only the movies, which then 20 years later had a fourth one, but you worked on a lot of the gaming side of it as well, right?
Yeah, definitely. And Enter the Matrix. That was really fun. I mean, I think we were doing that essentially simultaneously with Matrix Reloaded and Revolutions, and with the 10 Animatrix anime shorts. I think they were all kind of in house at the same time, if you could imagine. And just doing those two movies back to back was enervating and inspiring, but absolutely exhausting in so many ways. And I think I had 9 days off between when we finished Reloaded and we had to really start full blast on Revolutions, which we'd been building. I'd been doing preliminary designs for, but we had to get Reloaded finished. So I had 9 days, and I basically went to Death Valley and just sat in silence, and then drove back and got into Revolution. And otherwise, I just couldn't have done it. And then doing the game on top of it, because and I had a great team that were more game experts involved with all that. Especially Brian Watkins. It's always an interesting challenge to kind of bud off certain lines of sound development, right? Because a game it's a very different medium. Creating asset lists, and because the game's essentially the re-recording mixer is a machine. To a great extent. And there's a lot that can be done in implementation. You're kind of presetting stuff up, but in a way, the creators, including the filmmakers, the Wachowskis, everybody else, we're not there when the ultimate audience is experiencing our work. We're just not there. They're in their bedrooms and living rooms playing the game, and you have to think differently about it. But of course, we all wanted it to sound completely unified. As if it's obviously the same universes of the characters that they live in, the two, distinct universes. But yeah, it was a kick. It came out great. People still talk about it. I'm very glad that all worked out. And I mean, for Matrix 4, for Resurrections, there was a game too, kind of testing the new Unreal Engine. And that was fun to kind of also figure out how to make just, that enough like the movie world from 25 years earlier, when the technology has now approached a point. It's certainly cinematic in terms of resolution, and a lot of that it's probably beyond cinematic in certain ways. So that was cool as well.
So something that I want to talk to you about is the idea of a long-term creative relationship with certainly the Wachowskis. You've been working with them, as we mentioned. They did The Matrix, but they also did Bound before that. Was Bound your first project with them?
Yes, it was.
Yeah, and that's a great movie. If we have some younger listeners that weren't around when it came out, make sure you search that one out. Bound. Jennifer Tilly is the star, right?
Yeah, and Gina Gershon and Joey Pantoliano.
Yeah, it's a great film.
It's a masterpiece.
I'm just wondering if maybe you can talk about how you nurtured that relationship so that it can continue on.
Yeah, well, I'm very lucky to have that relationship. I was approached by Zach Steinberg, the editor of Bound and all the Matrix movies, but I was super busy at the time. I mean, any rational person would said, "No, I'm really sorry. I'd love to, help you guys out. I'm too busy." I mean, I was supervising a Western called Gunfighter's Moon. I was doing sound on something, and I was scoring another feature, an independent feature film. I was writing all the music and playing all the parts myself. And so I was already booked solid. I was a film composer from like 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. And then at 7 a.m., I was back to being a supervising sound editor on Gunfighters. It was totally crazy. But then Zach brought me to a screening of Bound. Of course, I fell in love with them, the Wachowskis, and the movie, the storytelling approach that they had. So I was in. I had to find a way to do it, and fortunately, I did. And I think for younger people, and I'm going to touch on this topic a bit for the MPSE Career Achievement Award, because a lot of career achievement is that exact question that you just asked me. How do you build relationships? How do you identify where they should be? How do you build them, and how do you keep them? And every indication said, Bound, stay away, because it was way under budgeted, like 80% of the great projects I've worked on. My emotions, my creative soul said, hell yes. So, I said yes, and we jumped on it. And we just had an absolute blast making the movie. It is such an incredible movie. In fact, I was just contacted a couple of days ago about from Criterion Collection is doing Criterion of Bound,
Cool.
right? And I think I worked on it in 94 and 5. I think it was finished in 96. That's quite a long time ago, but it's great that it's going to be celebrated in that way. You have to connect with people. I've certainly had meetings with directors, and it was just clear we were on different planes. The universes and the multiverse that we inhabit are like 4 or 5 universes away. It just don't connect with some people, and I can feel that. And sometimes I say, well, I'll figure it out. We'll do the movie anyway. But most of the time, I don't end up working with those people. But the Wachowskis, we all just resonated, certainly right off the top in that screening. And you learn to read the filmmakers, because especially, well, any filmmaker, you just develop certainly a shorthand, but you develop a kind of nomenclature is maybe a better word, and it's not always verbal. Directors generally have very little time to talk with the sound post people. Certainly in the Matrix, I could tell you some stories about how incredibly difficult it was to have any time. So by the time you start on a really big project, you have to already have that communication channels all honed out. And I remember on Bound, we already had this nonverbal thing. I could just see from their faces, we would do something and they would turn around and look at me. And then the look on their face said, we're totally on the right track. Oh my God, this is great. Or sorry, good try. How else can we approach this thing? You have to get it, because on a mixed stage, right? You got to keep moving, whether it's a huge movie or a tiny movie. There's not a lot of time to, hem and haw and throw out alternatives. And directors in general, and I'm sure your audience is very familiar with this, filmmakers don't really think in terms of sound most of the time. If they think they do, they probably do not. Same with screenwriters. I mean, I've gotten some really great jobs because I'd meet with the director and I would point to passages in the script and I'd say, that won't work. Let's cut that out of the script right now, because screenwriters, they don't sit in the chair that we all sit in, right? The audience, it's a nonverbal experience. You can't, there's no oceans of adverbs and adjectives to help the audience experience what the characters are experiencing. You have none of that. The thing, it either goes wrong, 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 or that's what the audience is going to get. And you know what I mean? I'm sure everybody out there knows what I mean. But like the Wachowskis, they always understood that. It's like I'm there to do it, and they make sounds with their mouths. You could hear it in the dailies sometimes of certain things, and that's just intuitively coming out. But it was always kind of I was there to not just interpret, but to materialize the oral sensory equipment that the characters were carrying around, and ultimately the audience through those characters. So, and that's the fun part, certainly, of doing what I do. And it was always uh, clear with them. So Making Bound was a what do they call it? It was like a retreat, right? Like corporate retreats where the execs all go and hang out on an island and dance, to get to know each other. But making a small movie it's very much like that. You're all kind of isolated together, and you have to do this thing. And Bound was a great experience in a lot of ways. They weren't expected to bring it in on budget or on time, and we all did, and so they got to retain their director's cut, which is kind of an essential part, of their process. They've pretty much always had director's cuts since then, but to get there requires everybody to be pretty disciplined in certain ways. But we all kind of earned it on Bound, and then the entire team. I think only the production designer changed with the other movies because they're shot in Australia. We brought in Owen Patterson as production designer, did most of the rest of their movies, but it was the same composer and editor, and and once we did The Matrix, it was generally the same re-recording mixers. Let's see. I'm trying to answer your question specifically. I mean, basically, the challenge is don't drop the ball. There are times I've told the story before, but there was something in Bound. Well, two things that I should mention. There was one moment that I could see from their faces as we wrapped up that day in the very end of the final mix. The expression that later on they would use a lot is CBB, could be better. That's like a visual effects business term, but that hadn't popped out of them yet. But I could see, at the end of the day, it was kind of like, yeah, okay, that scene's working. I just knew it was not working. And I was working all night long, and it was crazy. And luckily I had Todd Toon there as an effects editor, and he worked for me, who's, a very successful supervising sound editor now. And Todd's an amazing guy, and he rose to the occasion, and we kind of figured out, I had a tiny team. I couldn't afford any more than that, but I knew from the way we wrapped that night that the expression on their face had to be a different expression. It had to be that fuck yeah look. And I was not seeing it. So I literally just worked all night long trying a whole bunch of other things. And this was super early in the digital audio realm. So things were not as logistically automatic or smooth, right, or efficient in any way in those days. And we mixed it on Mag. But so I did it, and I was even more exhausted, and showed up at the stage, and we hung this thing before they got there, whatever the new thing was, and we did it. And then I got that expression. I got that smile. So it's all about, you work for that smile, like, oh my God, the movie is a movie now. And you have to identify those challenges, those moments, And on the other end of the spectrum, there was a moment that was a little tricky, where the two women, Viola and Corky, played by Jennifer Tilly and Gina Gershon, they've just met, and Jennifer Tilly asks Gina, who's like the fix-it person in this apartment building, the handy woman, I guess, asks her to rescue a ring from the drain of the sink. You could tell from the writing and the script, and from the way it's cut, that it couldn't just be a Foley moment there. The whole relationship was hinging on the sensuality of that moment. And I had fun with that. And I should get to this in a minute, but my whole background has been experimental films. So I'd love to get back to that, and how I draw from that kind of process. But in this case, it's like, okay, she's unscrewing a piece of drain pipe from a sink. So how do you make that the sexiest moment you've ever evoked in a movie? And I'm attuned. I mean, I have kind of an academic thing about the way we evolved to emotionally encode waveforms in a particular way. And that's another giant topic. But, for reasons, and I knew that a lot of times with metal and with wood and other inanimate materials, you could get them to be very expressive, not because the wood or the piece of drain pipe really feels that way, but because in our evolutionary past, we interpret that particular shape of sound as meaning something to us, in a sort of evolutionary biology way. And I love that. And I've read a million books and talked to, it's just something I've always studied because I'm fascinated. And that's what music is all about, right? Music is just about that. So, and sound design is to a great extent as well. So it had to, like all sound design, it had to work on a sort of literal level, but that's only the very, very surface. And directors, they don't hire you for that stuff, right? All of us are competent at doing, right, the surface stuff. It's like, duh, see a dog, hear a dog, I have no interest in any of that. I mean, I'm good at it, and I have people that are really good at it. But it's all about subtext when you write a script, right? When you read a script, you're reading for the subtext. You're reading for what's really going on there between the characters. And in this case, it's not about a drain pipe. It's a seduction. I listened to all the metal squeaks, and I went in the little studio we had there and tried, all kinds of things and took pliers and twisted things off. And I found a couple of sounds that did really evoke this kind of sensuous, passionate animal appeal. It's not a response exactly. It's an appeal, and very much like years and years later, doing the Twilight Breaking Dawn movie. I spent a lot of time with wolves, and I had to learn wolves, and I recorded some amazing things with these wolves, and because that's what they're doing, right? They are communicating with these howls, and I could talk for 5 hours just about the wolf sessions, and but it's the same thing. I had to get the metal of this pipe as she's unloosening it to howl like a wolf. It's a mating call. Anyway, I put some stuff together and we went onto this stage, in West LA, where I was like in residence for a long time. And we played it for them. And it was one of the most gratifying moments ever because they got that I got it. And B, they were getting it. They were getting beyond their wildest dreams. They didn't know if it was even really possible. All they knew is that it had to work. It had to work the way they shot it. And it's a little bit of a slow-mo, and it's a little kind of, rack focusy, and some of the tools, the visual tools for storytelling in there, but it's not really over the top, or maybe it is. But the sound is what had to make it work. And I just realized when I was doing my research for this speech, for this award, is that the reason that I was the sound designer on The Matrix is because of that moment. As Corky is unscrewing the drain pipe and removing an earring from the drain for the character Violet. That's why.
Wow.
I don't want to overstate it, but the feeling was that I had the soul, and I had the creative depth to do something like that. And it's the same thing. You do The Matrix, it's the same kind of moments, right? You can't just make code. It can't just be the sounds of bits. It's not about the bits, right? And bullet time it's really not about, aerodynamics. It is right on the surface. But so anyway, as I was going through Bound looking for clips for this thing, it just registered. That's it. That's why they fought so hard to get me onto The Matrix, and they fought to get all their key people onto that movie, which is The Matrix was a low budget movie, but it was just a massive ambition, and we did it. So, and then from then on, you just build on that relationship, right? And sometimes it means the initial opportunity to say yes instead of the logical answer of no. I'll do this. You get down to things like we did all the Matrix movies and Speed Racer together, and we were up at Skywalker finishing Jupiter Ascending. I guess I could tell the story. They had been hinting that they wanted to do a series for Netflix. I hadn't done television since I was a transfer guy in the mid 80s. A transfer person transfers from a sound effects library onto mag film, which then goes to the editors to edit on their moviolas for those youngsters, for everybody under the age of 90, may or may not be familiar with. But that's how a lot of us started out. The transfer person was the opening. If you were technically adept enough and reliable, that was an opportunity to get into sound editorial. And for a lot of people I know, but I hadn't done television, and I didn't like it. I had television, and I had worked on Moonlighting, which was a great show, and T.J. Hooker, and the kind of deadlines. I said, no, thank you. I could just see that creativity is the first casualty of that kind of expedience. So I didn't want to touch it. So here they were. They're going to do like a 12 episode show for Netflix, and I do, because I think at that point talked to Ren Kleiss, who was the sound designer. He does all of David Fincher's movies, and Fincher had the same idea. He woke up in the middle of the night and said, "I'm going to do House of Cards," and I think Ren had confirmed to me all of my worst nightmares. Right, that you're doing a 12-hour feature film that a bunch of people are going to think is a TV show.
So is this Sense8 that we're talking about?
Yes, it's Sense8.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I'd heard about it, and I was just like, and they weren't pressuring me in any way. And everybody out there has been through this and will go through this. It's the same thing. It's like, how much is this collaborative relationship worth? Because I don't want to do television. I have nothing against it. And, after Sopranos and Mad Men, I mean, television was starting to get really, really good, better than most movies. It wasn't an artistic thing. It was just the resources available, right? And the clash between the money people and the creative people. I could just see that was going to be even worse than all the movies they worked at. So Lana Wachowski had a birthday party at this restaurant, French Laundry, up in Napa, and she invited me, and so I drove down there from Skywalker, and it was a big table, like 16 people, and it was an amazing dinner, like a 6-hour 15 course dinner, not counting 20 courses of alcoholic things. It was a great crew, but I realized, looking around, all of their key creative people were sitting at that table. I looked around and I realized halfway through dinner that that entire table had said yes, except me. So you get to those moments, right? And it's not really coercion, but it's kind of, this is an incredible creative team. In the following few days, I went up to them and I said, "Yeah, okay, I get it. I'm in." But that was a big leap, because it was very scary to me. And it was Sense8, and it's a beautiful show. It's an amazing psychological sci-fi piece, and it's very underappreciated. And it was the exact kind of nightmare that I expected, because people thought it was a TV show. I mean, everybody involved with the resources, it's a TV show. Okay, you're going to have the luxurious mix schedule of 3.5 days per, hour-long episode, and you're this and you're this, and I just kept saying, no, not going to do it. No, not going to do it. And then finally submitted a budget that was still impossible, and I said, okay, we'll do this. But of course, it's just like a feature film. You're not allowed to make compromises.
Yeah.
Right? Artistically. The Wachowskis, they're not interested in that discussion. That topic is not on the syllabus, period. Even though, of course, as directors, they're making compromises constantly on the set, right? But in fact, that's, I think, one of them at some point when we were doing Revolutions said that's what directing is accepting compromises at a certain point. But so I know I'm contradicting myself, but you all know what I mean. It's in the Sound Post. It's really about maintaining a storytelling and oral storytelling standard that you've set up with, whether it's big movies or little movies. So it was unbelievably difficult, because we're on the stage, of course. The episodes took 9, 10, 12 days, because we would rework moments. They're constantly rewriting the music, and everything that wasn't full on 100% feature standard was not acceptable. It was CBB. And so it was one of those career thresholds it's not really a twist in the road. It's just you're going through a swamp instead of a arid desert, in terms of the logistics. But you have to think, can I emerge alive from the swamp? And I kind of didn't. And my whole team, Steph Flack and I and everybody, we said, never again, never, ever, ever. We're not going to ever do streaming or anything, ever, ever, ever. No, we're going to die. But then, then the show was kind of a hit, and they come back and they say, okay, we're going to do another season. And I'm like, no. But then, they send you some scripts, and but we had to, deal with it. Basically, the budget had to be way bigger, and it was still a nightmare. And there were certain key people involved that we just said, sorry, but we can't get it. We can't work on this if those people are going to be in the way. And it all got worked out, and I'm glad we did it. It was very fun. I got to spend a couple more winters in Chicago, which was always kind of a blast for a Southern California kid like me. I'm still trying to answer your question. I guess I've kind of, you just can't let them down. You can't. And I mean, the weird thing is, on Matrix Resurrections, I was the only person left from their original crew.
Really?
Yeah, I was the OG, as Lana would say.
Okay, we're going to break up this talk here. Part 1, as you just heard, was mostly about Dane's work with the Wachowskis. Next week in Part 2, Dane will talk about his work on other projects, including the excellent new Prime series, Expats. As a reminder, Dane is getting the Lifetime Achievement Award at this year's MPSE Golden Reel Awards on March 3rd in Los Angeles. You can purchase tickets to come out to the gala at mpse.org. It's going to be a really fun night, so come on out and be a part of it. On behalf of Dane Davis, my name is Tim Muirhead. Thanks for telling your friends and colleagues in the sound community all about Tonebenders.
Tonebenders is produced by Timothy Muirhead, Renee Coronado, and Teresa Morrow. Theme music is by Mark Strait. Send your emails to info@tonebenderspodcast.com. Follow us on Twitter via @thetonebenders, and join Tonebenders Podcast on Facebook. Support this podcast. You can use our links when you shop at Amazon or B&H, or leave us a tip. Just go to tonebenderspodcast.com and click the support button. Thanks for listening.
Are you looking for more audio-related podcasts to listen to? Tonebenders is part of the Audio Podcast Alliance, featuring a hand-picked selection of the very best podcasts about sound. Be sure to hear the latest episodes from our friends in the community at audiopodcast.org.